The snow fell heavy on Cedar Ridge, Utah, covering the modest farmhouse where Sarah Chen pressed her face against the frosted window. 6 months pregnant and completely alone, she watched the last neighbor's truck disappear down the mountain road. They'd all turned their backs on her after the rumors started spreading about her late husband's business dealings. But Elder Matthews had been different. When he'd found her collapsed in the church parking lot 3 days ago, starving and desperate, he'd whispered those 3 words that changed everything: "Your family now." He'd brought her to this safe house, promising protection from whatever or whoever was hunting her. What the kind elder didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just any pregnant widow. She was a former federal prosecutor who'd helped send some very dangerous people to prison, people who'd already killed her husband for what he'd discovered about their operation. Now they were coming for her, and the innocent Mormon family sheltering her had no idea they were harboring the FBI's most wanted witness. The question was, would Elder Matthews still call her family when he learned the truth about who she really was? Sarah pulled her cardigan tighter around her swollen belly and stepped back from the window. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. She'd been Sarah Chen for 3 months now, long enough for the identity to feel almost real. Before that, she'd been Sarah Williams, Assistant District Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Before that, Sarah Kim, ambitious law student with dreams of changing the world. Now she was just a woman running out of places to hide. The farmhouse creaked around her, settling deeper into the winter silence. Elder Matthews had left early that morning for Salt Lake City, promising to return with supplies and news about her situation. He believed she was fleeing an abusive relationship, a story she'd crafted carefully to explain her fear without revealing the full truth. The lie sat heavy in her chest, but it was safer than the alternative. She moved to the kitchen, grateful for the warmth radiating from the wood-burning stove. Sister Matthews, Rebecca, had shown her how to tend the fire before they'd left for their daughter's wedding in Provo. "You're healing," Rebecca had said, her calloused hands gentle on Sarah's shoulders. "Take all the time you need. If only healing were possible." Sarah touched the burner phone hidden in her pocket, the one she'd bought with cash in Flagstaff. Agent Morrison had called twice in the past week, each message more urgent than the last. "They found your safe house in Phoenix," the first had said. "You need to come in now." The second was simpler: "Sarah, they're getting closer. Please." But coming in meant testifying, and testifying meant putting her unborn child in a courtroom where cameras would broadcast their faces across every news channel in America. The Kozlov crime family had long memories and longer reach. Even witness protection couldn't guarantee safety, not when billions in laundered money hung in the balance. Her husband David had learned that the hard way. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, the way the FBI psychologist had taught her during the first terrifying days after David's murder. She couldn't afford to spiral into panic, not when every decision could mean life or death for her baby. The sound of tires crunching on snow made her freeze. It was too early for Elder Matthews to return, and the Matthewses wouldn't be back until Sunday. Sarah moved to the living room window, staying in the shadows as she peered out. A black SUV sat idling at the end of the long driveway. Tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, but Sarah's blood turned to ice anyway. She'd seen too many vehicles just like it in her old life, the kind federal agents drove, but also the kind that transported men who made people disappear. The SUV's engine shut off. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her belly as the baby kicked again, harder this time. She had perhaps 2 minutes before whoever was in that vehicle reached the house. 2 minutes to decide whether to run into a blizzard 6 months pregnant or trust that Elder Matthews' remote location might still provide cover. The burner phone buzzed against her hip. A text from an unknown number. "We just want to talk, Sarah. Come outside and no one gets hurt." Her breath came in short gasps now, fogging the window. They'd found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, all her careful movements from city to city, they'd tracked her to this peaceful farmhouse where she'd finally started to feel safe. Sarah closed her eyes and pressed both hands to her stomach. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. "Mama's going to keep you safe. I promise." She grabbed the emergency bag she'd kept packed since Phoenix and moved toward the back door. The snow was coming down harder now, erasing her footprints almost as quickly as she could make them. If she could reach the tree line behind the barn, she might have a chance. The front door handle rattled just as she slipped outside into the howling wind. The kitchen knife trembled in Sarah's hand as she sliced through the onion, each cut precise despite her shaking fingers. The routine of dinner preparation usually calmed her, but tonight the familiar sounds of the Hendricks household felt like a soundtrack to her mounting dread. Through the window above the sink, she watched Bishop Hendricks park his truck in the driveway earlier than usual. "Sarah, dear, could you set an extra place?" Sister Hendricks called from the dining room. "James is bringing someone home for dinner." The knife slipped, nicking Sarah's thumb. A drop of blood fell onto the cutting board, mixing with the translucent onion pieces. She pressed a dish towel against the cut and closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe. It could be anyone. A church member, a business associate, someone completely innocent. The front door opened with its characteristic squeal, followed by the sound of boots being removed. Bishop Hendricks always insisted on keeping a clean house, especially during the dinner hour when families came together in righteousness. Sarah had learned to appreciate these small rituals that marked the rhythm of a life so different from her previous existence. "Sarah, this is Detective Morrison from Salt Lake City," Bishop Hendricks announced as the two men entered the kitchen. "He's investigating some missing persons cases and thought we might be able to help." The man standing beside Bishop Hendricks looked nothing like the police officers from Sarah's past. Detective Morrison was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore a simple grey suit that had seen better days and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough of the world to understand its complexities. "Pleased to meet you," Sarah managed, keeping the dish towel pressed against her thumb. "I hope you don't mind pot roast. It's nothing fancy." "Sounds perfect," Morrison replied, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "Bishop Hendricks tells me you've been staying here for several months. This is a wonderful community you've found." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The baby chose that moment to kick, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. Morrison's eyes flickered to her rounded belly, then back to her face with professional neutrality. "How can we help with your investigation?" Sister Hendricks asked, as she bustled into the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a woman who believed problems could be solved with prayer, hard work, and a good meal, in that order. Morrison pulled out a small notebook. "We're looking into the disappearance of several women over the past 2 years, all young, all pregnant or recently pregnant. The pattern suggests they might have been involved in some kind of organized activity before they vanished." The dish towel was soaked with blood now. Sarah excused herself to find a proper bandage, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the person she had been 6 months ago. Gone was the carefully applied makeup, the styled hair, the expensive clothes that had been both costume and armor. In their place was someone scrubbed clean, dressed simply, carrying new life instead of dealing death. When she returned to the kitchen, Morrison was showing photographs to Bishop Hendricks. Sarah caught a glimpse of familiar faces before forcing herself to look away, focusing instead on stirring the gravy that didn't need stirring. "Actually," Morrison said, tucking the photos away, "I was hoping to speak with Sarah privately for a moment. One of the missing women used the name Sarah Miller at one point, and with the pregnancy." He trailed off delicately. The wooden spoon clattered to the floor. Sarah bent to retrieve it, buying herself precious seconds to think. When she straightened, 3 pairs of eyes were watching her with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. "Of course," she heard herself say. though I'm sure I won't be much help. I lived pretty quietly before I came here." Morrison smiled, but she caught something sharp beneath the surface. "I'm sure you did. Maybe we could talk while you finish dinner preparations? I promise not to get in the way." Sister Hendricks squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently before shepherding her husband out of the kitchen. "Call if you need anything, dear." Alone with Morrison, Sarah turned back to the stove and began preparing biscuits from scratch, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. The detective leaned against the counter close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the wedding ring on his left hand. "So," he said conversationally, "tell me about your life before you found religion." The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Sarah pulled into the grocery store, her hands still trembling from the phone call. 24 hours had passed since the voice from her past had shattered her carefully constructed world, and she hadn't slept more than an hour. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind through the trees had sent her heart racing. She pressed her palm against her rounded belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "We're okay," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "We're going to be okay." The automatic doors whooshed open, and Sarah grabbed a cart, trying to blend into the mundane rhythm of grocery shopping. Milk, bread, prenatal vitamins, normal things for a normal life that suddenly felt like an elaborate charade. "Sarah, there you are." "Oh, hello, Bishop." Sarah forced a smile, hoping her exhaustion wasn't as visible as it felt. "You missed our planning meeting yesterday evening," Eleanor said, her tone gentle but pointed. "For the Relief Society fundraiser, we were counting on your input about the silent auction." Sarah's mind raced. She'd completely forgotten about the meeting, too consumed by the nightmare that had suddenly descended upon her peaceful existence. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't feeling well yesterday." Bishop Matthews studied her face with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to reading his congregation's troubles. "You do look pale, dear. Everything all right?" The concern in his voice nearly broke her. These people had given her everything, a home, a community, a chance to start over. They'd asked no questions when she'd arrived 3 years ago, 7 months pregnant and carrying nothing but a suitcase and a story about a husband killed in a car accident. They'd simply opened their arms and hearts. "Just tired," she managed. "The pregnancy is getting harder." "Well, you must take care of yourself," Eleanor said, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's arm. "And that precious baby. Have you given any more thought to names?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed in her purse. Her blood turned to ice as she saw the text message. "Time's running out, Sarah. Or should I say, Rebecca?" The phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the store like a gunshot. "Goodness!" Eleanor exclaimed, bending to retrieve it. "Are you sure you're all right?" Sarah snatched the phone back before Eleanor could see the screen. "Sorry, I'm just clumsy these days." The irony was crushing. Here was a man who dedicated his life to helping others, offering assistance to someone whose very presence might destroy everything he'd worked to build. If the truth came out, the scandal wouldn't just touch her. It would devastate the entire ward, possibly the whole stake. The Mormon community that had saved her would become collateral damage in a war she'd thought was over. "I appreciate that, Bishop. Really. I just need to get through these last few weeks." Another buzz from her phone. Another message. "The FBI is still looking for Rebecca Martinez." Funny how they never think to check Mormon wards in Utah. Sarah's vision blurred at the edges. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the sounds of the store too loud. She gripped the cart handle to steady herself. "Sarah?" Eleanor's voice seemed to come from far away. "You're white as a sheet. I need some air," Sarah gasped, abandoning her cart and pushing toward the exit. She made it to her car before the panic attack hit in full force. Her chest constricted, her breathing came in short, sharp gasps, and her heart hammered against her ribs. The baby responded to her distress with sharp kicks, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. Through the windshield, she could see Bishop Matthews and Eleanor standing at the store entrance, clearly debating whether to follow her. Their faces were creased with worry, and Sarah felt another stab of guilt. These good people didn't deserve to be dragged into her mess. Her phone rang, and she knew without looking that it would be the same number from yesterday. With shaking fingers, she answered, "What do you want?" Now that's more like the Rebecca I remember. Direct. No more of that sweet Mormon act. I'm not her anymore. A low chuckle. We both know that's not true. You can change your name, your address, even your religion, but you can't change what you did. What we did together, that's in the past. The past has a way of catching up, doesn't it? Especially when it's worth $50 million. The meeting room in the Relief Society building felt smaller than usual, its cream-colored walls seeming to press inward as Sarah sat across from Bishop Coleman and his two counselors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone's faces look gaunt and suspicious. Sarah's hands rested protectively over her belly, where the baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her tension. "Sister Matthews," Bishop Coleman began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with his calling, "we've received some concerning information about your past." Sarah's throat constricted. She'd known this day would come eventually, but she'd hoped for more time. Time to prepare, time to find the right words, time to figure out how to protect the people who had become her family without destroying them in the process. "What kind of information?" she managed to ask, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Brother Williams, the first counselor, opened a manila folder and withdrew a photograph. Sarah's blood turned to ice when she saw it, herself, 5 years younger, standing next to Marcus outside a warehouse in Phoenix. They both looked different then, harder, their eyes holding secrets that decent people weren't meant to carry. "This was sent to us anonymously," Brother Williams said, sliding the photo across the mahogany table, "along with some very detailed allegations about your involvement in certain criminal activities." Sarah stared at the photograph, memories flooding back like poison through her veins. That warehouse had been one of Marcus's fronts, a place where stolen goods moved through the shadows of legitimate commerce. She remembered the weight of the gun in her purse that day, the constant looking over her shoulder, the sick feeling in her stomach that had become as familiar as breathing. "I don't know what you've been told," Sarah said carefully, "but I can explain." "Can you?" Brother Hendricks, the second counselor, interrupted. His usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by something colder. "Because according to this letter, you weren't just Marcus's wife, you were his partner, in everything." The baby kicked harder now, and Sarah pressed her hand against the movement, trying to calm both herself and the child within her. These men had been like fathers to her, had welcomed her into their community when she'd arrived broken and afraid. The thought of losing their trust felt like losing her salvation all over again. "That life is behind me," she said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "When I came here, I was running from it. I've been trying to build something different, something clean. But it's not behind you, is it?" Bishop Coleman leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. "Someone out there knows who you really are, someone who wants something from you, or wants to hurt you, and by extension they want to hurt this community." Sarah's mind raced to the phone calls she'd been receiving, the hang-ups that came at odd hours, the feeling of being watched that she'd attributed to pregnancy paranoia. Someone had found her, just as she'd always feared they would. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. "For now, just us," Brother Williams said. "But we can't keep this contained forever. The person who sent this information made it clear they have more evidence, much more." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her past pressing down like a physical force. She thought of Sister Chen, who had sat with her through morning sickness, of the young mothers in the ward who looked up to her as an example of strength through adversity, of the children who would wave to her from their front yards as she walked past each evening. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "We want the truth," Bishop Coleman said. "All of it. Everything you've been hiding, because right now we're flying blind, and that puts everyone at risk." Sarah opened her eyes and saw something in the bishop's face that gave her a sliver of hope, not condemnation but concern. These men weren't just protecting their community from her, they were trying to protect her too. "If I tell you everything," she said slowly, "it will change how you see me, how everyone sees me, and there are things, dangerous things that might put innocent people in harm's way." "Sister Matthews," Brother Hendricks said, his voice softening slightly, "you've been carrying this burden alone for too long. Let us help you carry it." The fluorescent lights continued their relentless humming as Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of everything that followed. She thought of the baby growing inside her, innocent of all sins, deserving of a chance at the kind of life Sarah had never imagined possible until she'd found sanctuary in this desert community. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything. But once I start talking, there's no going back for any of us." The three men exchanged glances, and Bishop Coleman nodded gravely. "We understand," he said. "Begin whenever you're ready." Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. The morning light filtered through Sarah's kitchen window as she stood at the sink, her hands trembling as she gripped the ceramic mug. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Every shadow seemed to hold Marcus's face. Every creak of the old farmhouse made her heart race. The sound of gravel crunching under tires sent panic shooting through her chest. She peered through the gingham curtains and exhaled shakily when she saw Bishop Hartwell's familiar blue sedan pulling into her driveway. Behind him, Sister Morrison's white SUV followed, packed with what looked like cleaning supplies and casserole dishes. Sarah quickly smoothed her hair and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. The bruise on her temple had faded to a yellowish shadow, easily hidden with makeup. She forced a smile and opened the door before they could knock. "Sister Coleman," Bishop Hartwell's warm voice carried genuine concern. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Much better, thank you." The lie came easily now. "The baby's been active today, which the doctor says is a good sign." Sister Morrison bustled past them both, arms laden with supplies. "I brought ingredients for that chicken and rice casserole you love, and some of that herbal tea that helped with my morning sickness. Though I suppose at 6 months you're past all that nastiness." Sarah nodded gratefully, but her attention remained fixed on Bishop Hartwell's serious expression. He waited until Sister Morrison disappeared into the kitchen before speaking again. "Sarah, I need to ask you about something. Detective Reynolds came by the church office yesterday." The blood drained from her face. "What did he want?" "He was asking about your background, how long you've been part of our community. Standard questions for someone involved in an incident like yesterday, but—" He paused, studying her carefully. "He seemed particularly interested in your life before you came to Cedar Valley." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. "What did you tell him?" "Only what I know. That you arrived here 18 months ago, recently widowed, looking for a fresh start. That you've been a blessing to our community." His eyes softened. "But Sarah, if there's something more you need to tell me, something that might help explain why someone would want to hurt you." The kitchen clatter of Sister Morrison unpacking groceries filled the silence between them. Sarah knew this moment would come eventually. She'd rehearsed different versions of the truth in her mind countless times, but now, faced with Bishop Hartwell's kind, expectant face, the words wouldn't come. "Aye," she started, then stopped. Through the window she caught sight of a dark sedan parked across the street. Her blood turned to ice, the same make and model Marcus had always driven. "Excuse me," she whispered, moving to the window for a better look. The car was empty, but her hands began to shake uncontrollably. It could be a coincidence. Cedar Valley was small, but not so small that every car was familiar. Still, the timing felt wrong, dangerous. "Sarah?" Bishop Hartwell had followed her to the window. "What is it?" "That car." She pointed with a trembling finger. "Do you recognize it?" He squinted through the glass. "Can't say I do. Might be someone visiting the Hendersons. They mentioned their son was coming in from Salt Lake City." Before Sarah could respond, Sister Morrison's voice called from the kitchen. "Sarah, honey, your phone's been buzzing. Sounds important." Sarah's legs felt like lead as she walked to the counter where her phone lay face down. 3 missed calls from a blocked number, her throat constricted as she noticed the voicemail notification. "Go ahead," Bishop Hartwell encouraged gently. "We'll give you privacy if you need it." "No, it's probably just the doctor's office." Another lie, but she couldn't risk them leaving her alone. Not now. She played the voicemail on speaker, praying it would be something innocent. The voice that emerged made her knees buckle. "Hello, Elena." The sound of her real name, spoken in that familiar cold tone, sent waves of nausea through her body. Sister Morrison gasped and moved to steady her, but Sarah barely noticed. "I know you thought you were clever disappearing like that. But you can't hide forever. Not from me, not from what you owe." The message continued, but Sarah's vision was tunneling. The voice belonged to Vincent Torino, Marcus's business partner, the man whose money she'd stolen, the man who'd sworn to hunt her down no matter where she ran. "We need to talk, Elena. Today. The little coffee shop on Main Street, 2 o'clock. Come alone, or I start making visits to your new friends, that nice bishop maybe, or the lady with all those casseroles." The voicemail ended, leaving the kitchen in deafening silence. Sarah looked up to find both Bishop Hartwell and Sister Morrison staring at her with expressions of shock and confusion. "Sarah," Bishop Hartwell's voice was barely above a whisper. "Who was that? And why did he call you Elena?" Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph that had fallen from behind her jewelry box. Marcus stood in the center, his arm draped possessively around her younger self, both of them flanked by 3 other people she'd tried so hard to forget. The warehouse fire had been supposed to erase everything, the evidence, the witnesses, the past that could destroy her carefully constructed new life. But here was proof that some things refused to burn. A knock at her bedroom door made her jump, and she quickly shoved the photo under her pillow. "Come in," she called, forcing steadiness into her voice. Rebecca peeked inside, her face etched with concern. "I brought you some chamomile tea. You looked so pale earlier." She entered carrying a steaming mug, her eyes immediately drawn to Sarah's disheveled appearance. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call Dr. Morrison?" "No, I'm fine. Just tired." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully, using the warm ceramic to steady her shaking hands. "Thank you for taking care of me. You've all been so kind." Rebecca settled into the chair beside the bed, her expression softening. "That's what families do. And you are family now, Sarah. Whatever troubles you carried here, they don't define who you are in Salt Creek." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah forced herself to sip the tea, buying time to compose her response. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried as deeply as we hope. "Is that what's been weighing on you? Your life before?" Rebecca's voice carried no judgment, only gentle concern. "We all have chapters we'd rather close. The Lord offers redemption to those who seek it genuinely." Sarah almost laughed at the bitter irony. Redemption. If Rebecca knew what she'd done, what she'd been part of, would she still speak of forgiveness? Would any of them welcome her if they understood the blood on her hands? "There are some sins that go beyond redemption," Sarah whispered. "I don't believe that." Rebecca leaned forward, her hand covering Sarah's. "Whatever you think you've done, whatever mistakes you've made, they don't have to define your future. Your child deserves to grow up surrounded by love and acceptance." The baby kicked as if in response, and Sarah pressed her free hand to her belly. Everything she'd built here, the safety, the community, the chance for her child to have a normal life, balanced on the edge of destruction. One phone call, one recognition, one person digging too deeply into her past, and it would all crumble. "Rebecca," she began carefully, "what would happen if someone came here looking for me? Someone from my old life?" Rebecca's eyes sharpened with protective instinct. "Are you in some kind of danger? Is someone threatening you?" "Not exactly, but there are people who might want to find me, people who wouldn't understand why I left the way I did." Sarah chose her words like stepping stones across a dangerous river. "If they came asking questions, we protect our own. Rebecca said firmly. "Bishop Morrison and the elders take that responsibility seriously. But Sarah, if there's real danger, we need to know what we're protecting you from." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Sarah could feel the photograph burning under her pillow, could almost hear Marcus's voice from years past. "Insurance, sweetheart. Everyone needs a little insurance." She'd thought his paranoid tendencies were just another facet of his criminal mind, but now she understood. The photograph wasn't just a memory, it was leverage. Someone had kept it for a reason, and that someone might still be alive. "There was a man," Sarah said finally, testing the waters. "My late husband's business partner. They were involved in questionable activities. I found out things I shouldn't have known." It wasn't entirely a lie. Marcus had indeed been involved with dangerous people, and she had learned terrible secrets. She just omitted her own role in the darkness that had consumed their world. "Did you go to the police?" Rebecca asked. It was complicated. These weren't the kind of people you could just report. And when Marcus died, I thought it was over. I thought I could start fresh. But now you think this partner might come looking for you? Sarah nodded, letting Rebecca draw her own conclusions. It was easier than explaining that she wasn't running from Marcus's associates. She was running from herself, from what she'd become in that world of violence and moral compromise. "We'll handle it," Rebecca said with quiet determination. "This community has faced threats before. We know how to circle the wagons when needed." As Rebecca left, promising to speak with Bishop Morrison about security measures, Sarah pulled out the photograph again. 5 faces stared back at her from a time when she'd believed power and fear were the only currencies that mattered. 3 of those faces belonged to people who died in the warehouse fire. But what about the 4th? The woman standing just behind Marcus, her expression cold and calculating. What had happened to Elena Vasquez? And more importantly, had Elena sent this photograph as a warning that the past was finally catching up? The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Sarah's apartment door while she was in the shower. She found it when she emerged, hair dripping, one hand supporting her growing belly. Her name was written across the front in block letters, no return address, no postmark. Inside were photographs. Sarah's hands trembled as she spread them across her kitchen table. The images were grainy but unmistakable. Herself, 5 years younger, standing outside a warehouse in Phoenix. Another showed her getting into Marcus's black sedan. A third captured her walking away from what she now knew had been a crime scene, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. But it was the last photograph that made her sink into her chair, the baby kicking frantically as if sensing her distress. The image showed her face clearly as she handed an envelope to Detective Ray Morrison, the same Detective Morrison who had been found dead in his car 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest, his death ruled a suicide. A single sheet of paper accompanied the photos. The message was brief: "You have 48 hours to leave town. Tell no one. If you're still here Thursday morning, these go to the FBI and your Mormon friends." Sarah's first instinct was to run. She had done it before, disappeared from Phoenix in the middle of the night, leaving behind her apartment, her job, everything except the clothes on her back and the knowledge that could destroy her. But Phoenix had been different. She'd had no ties there, no one who would miss her beyond wondering why she'd stopped showing up for work. Here she had Rebecca, who checked on her daily. She had Bishop Williams, who had personally ensured she received proper prenatal care. She had the entire Relief Society, women who had wrapped her in their community like a warm blanket, never questioning her past or demanding explanations she couldn't give. And she had the baby. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, feeling the firm roundness that had become her anchor. At 7 months, leaving would be complicated. She would need medical records, a new doctor, a place to give birth. She would need to start over again, but this time with a child depending on her. The afternoon sun streamed through her kitchen window as she sat motionless, the photographs scattered before her like tarot cards predicting her doom. Someone had been watching her in Phoenix. Someone knew about her relationship with Marcus, about the money she had taken, about Detective Morrison. about the real reason Morrison had died. The knock on her door made her jump. Sarah quickly gathered the photographs, shoving them back into the envelope as Rebecca's cheerful voice called out, "Sarah, are you home? I brought you some of my mother's apple butter." Sarah forced herself to breathe normally as she opened the door. Rebecca stood in the hallway, her blonde hair pulled back in its usual neat bun, holding a mason jar with a gingham ribbon tied around the lid. Her smile faltered as she took in Sarah's appearance. "You look terrible. Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," Sarah managed. "The baby's been active today. Have you been eating? You need to keep your strength up." Rebecca opened the refrigerator, frowning at its sparse contents. "This won't do at all. I'm bringing you dinner tonight, and don't even think about arguing." Sarah watched her friend bustle around the small kitchen, organizing and rearranging with the efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for others. The normalcy of it, Rebecca's maternal concern, the promise of a home-cooked meal, the simple kindness of apple butter, made her throat tight with unshed tears. "Rebecca," she said quietly. Rebecca was examining the expiration date on a carton of milk. What would you do if someone you cared about had done something terrible in their past? Rebecca set down the milk and turned to face her fully. Her blue eyes were serious now, the playful energy replaced by something deeper. "I suppose it would depend on who they are now," she said carefully. "The gospel teaches us about redemption, about the possibility of change. We're not defined by our worst moments, Sarah. We're defined by what we choose to do after them. Even if those choices put other people at risk, are we talking about someone specific?" Sarah wanted to tell her everything. She wanted to lay out the photographs, explain about Marcus and Detective Morrison and the money that had bought her freedom from a life she had never chosen. She wanted to confess that she was a fraud, that her presence in their community might bring danger to people who had shown her nothing but love. Instead, she shook her head. "Just something I've been thinking about." Rebecca studied her for a long moment, then crossed the small kitchen and pulled Sarah into a gentle hug, careful of her belly. "Whatever it is," she whispered, "you don't have to face it alone." The ultrasound gel felt cold against Sarah's rounded belly as Dr. Martinez moved the wand across her skin. The rhythmic whooshing of the baby's heartbeat filled the small examination room, a sound that usually brought her comfort, but today only heightened her anxiety. 24 weeks now, and the child inside her seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, not just in weight, but in the burden of secrets she carried. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Martinez said, his kind eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Baby's measuring right on track. How are you feeling?" Sarah forced a smile, the same practiced expression she'd worn for weeks now. "Good. Tired, but good. That's normal. Are you getting enough rest? The community has been taking care of you, I hope?" "Yes, they've been wonderful." The words tasted bitter. How could she explain that their kindness was slowly suffocating her? That every casserole delivered, every offer to help with groceries, every gentle inquiry about her well-being felt like another link in the chain binding her to this place? As she drove home through the familiar streets of Cedar Heights, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it, Sarah? Or should I say, Rebecca? Her hands trembled as she pulled over, the car lurching to a stop beside the town's small park where children played on swings while their mothers watched from nearby benches. The picture of normalcy mocked her. She stared at the message until the words blurred, then deleted it with shaking fingers. Rebecca. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 2 years, hadn't even thought it in months. But seeing it there, stark against the phone's blue screen, brought everything flooding back. The cramped apartment in Vegas, Marcus's increasingly erratic behavior, the packages that arrived at odd hours, the phone calls that sent him into rages or sent him disappearing for days. A tap on her passenger window made her jump. Sister Jensen stood there, her grey hair perfectly styled despite the afternoon wind, her expression one of gentle concern. Sarah rolled down the window, hoping her voice would sound steady. "Sister Jensen, hello, dear." Are you all right? You look pale. Just a little car sick. The baby, you know. Sister Jensen's eyes softened with understanding. Oh, I remember those days. Would you like me to drive you home? Brother Jensen could follow in our car. The offer was so genuinely kind that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. No, thank you. I'm fine, really. You know, Sarah, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Sister Jensen glanced around, then leaned closer to the window. There was a man asking questions about you at the church yesterday. Said he was an old friend trying to reconnect. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What kind of questions? Oh, the usual things. How long you'd been here, where you were living. Bishop Reynolds handled it, of course. Told him we don't give out personal information about our members. Sister Jensen paused, studying Sarah's face. You didn't seem to have many visitors, so we thought it was odd. Should we be concerned? The careful way she phrased the question told Sarah that Bishop Reynolds had already shared his suspicions with the Relief Society president. In a community this size, secrets were luxuries no one could afford for long. I'm sure it was nothing important, Sarah managed. Thank you for letting me know. But as she drove away, leaving Sister Jensen standing by the park with that worried expression, Sarah knew her time was running out. The careful life she'd built here was crumbling, and soon there would be nothing left but the truth she'd spent 2 years running from. At home, she sat in Marcus's old recliner, the only piece of furniture she'd kept from their life together, and placed both hands on her belly. The baby kicked, a strong flutter against her ribs that made her gasp. I'm sorry, she whispered to the child who couldn't hear her, couldn't understand the complexity of their situation. I'm so sorry you're caught up in this. The afternoon stretched into evening, and still she sat there, weighing her options. She could run again, pack what little she had, and disappear before whoever was asking questions found what they were looking for. But where could a pregnant woman with no money and no family go? And what kind of life would that be for her child? Or she could stay and face whatever was coming. Tell Bishop Reynolds the truth about Marcus, about the money, about why she'd really come to Cedar Heights. Let the community decide if their charity extended to harboring the widow of a man whose crimes were finally catching up to him. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the neat lawns and tidy houses of the neighborhood that had become her sanctuary. Soon, she would have to choose between the safety of her unborn child and the safety of the people who had saved her life. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her distress. The morning sun cast long shadows across the meeting house parking lot as Sarah watched Bishop Morrison unlock the heavy wooden doors. Her hands trembled against the steering wheel, the manila envelope beside her containing photographs that could destroy everything she'd come to love about this place. 3 days had passed since Detective Reynolds' visit, 3 sleepless nights of weighing impossible choices. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her turmoil, and she pressed her palm against her belly in a futile attempt at comfort. You don't have to do this, she whispered to herself. But Marcus Rivera's words echoed in her mind. They deserve to know what kind of man they're protecting. Sarah stepped out of her car, the envelope clutched against her chest like armor. The meeting house stood serene and welcoming, its white steeple piercing the clear blue sky. In 2 hours, families would fill these grounds for Sunday services, children laughing as they ran between the cars, parents greeting each other with warm embraces. The thought of shattering that peace made her stomach lurch. Bishop Morrison noticed her approach and smiled, though concern flickered in his eyes. Sarah, you're early. Everything all right? I need to speak with you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About Thomas Wynne. The color drained from his face. He glanced around the empty parking lot, then gestured toward the building. Come inside. They walked through the familiar hallways in silence, past the Relief Society room where Sister Patterson had taught her to can peaches, past the primary classroom where she'd helped with children's choir practice. Each step felt like a betrayal. Bishop Morrison's office smelled of leather and old books, the same scent that had comforted her during their first meeting when she'd arrived broken and afraid. He settled behind his desk, hands folded, waiting. Sarah placed the envelope on the polished wood surface between them, but didn't release it. "What I'm about to show you will change everything. Sarah, whatever burden you're carrying..." "Thomas Wynne murdered my husband." The words erupted from her like a physical force. Not in some accident or moment of passion. He tortured David for information about a drug operation, then killed him when David refused to talk. Bishop Morrison's face went ashen. That's impossible. Thomas is a monster hiding behind your trust." Sarah opened the envelope, spreading the photographs across his desk. David was working undercover for the DEA. "These photos showed Thomas and his associates with my husband the night he disappeared." The bishop stared at the images, his breathing shallow. Sarah watched him process each detail. David bound and bloodied, Thomas's face clearly visible, the warehouse where her husband drew his last breath. "My God," he whispered. "How did you..." "The DEA contacted me. They've been building a case, but they need someone inside Thomas's circle to gather evidence. They want me to wear a wire, to get him to confess." Bishop Morrison pushed back from the desk as if the photographs might contaminate him. "You can't seriously be considering this. He killed my husband and he's using your community to hide. How many other lives is he planning to destroy? Think about your baby, Sarah. Think about the danger you'd be putting yourself in." She'd thought of little else. Every scenario ended in violence, in loss, in the destruction of the fragile sanctuary she'd built here. But David's voice haunted her dreams, pleading for justice that only she could deliver. "The ward has embraced Thomas completely," she continued. "He's gained access to everything, the finances, the membership records, even the temple. What if his criminal associates see opportunity in that trust? We can handle this internally. I'll speak with the stake president." "And what? Ask Thomas politely to leave?" "He's a killer, Bishop. He won't just disappear because you ask him to." The office fell silent except for the tick of an ancient clock on the wall. Bishop Morrison studied her with the same gentle intensity he'd shown during her first confession here, when she'd wept over smaller sins and simpler guilt. "If what you're saying is true," he said finally, "then we're all in danger. Not if we act carefully. The DEA has a plan." "No," his voice carried the authority of his calling. "I won't have you risk your life or your child's life for this. There has to be another way." Sarah gathered the photographs, her decision crystallizing. "I hoped you'd understand, that you'd want to protect the people who trust you. I do want to protect them, including you." She stood, the envelope once again pressed against her chest. "Then you'll keep this conversation between us?" "Sarah, please. Thomas expects me at his house this afternoon. He's been asking about David's work, about why I moved here. He's getting suspicious." She met the bishop's eyes. "If I don't come back, you'll know I was right about him." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Bishop Morrison alone with the terrible knowledge that his flock harbored a wolf, and that Sarah Chen was walking willingly into its jaws. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Sarah clutched it against her chest, her heart hammering so hard she was certain the baby could feel it too. Bishop Matthews sat across from her in his office, his weathered hands folded on the oak desk, watching her with those penetrating grey eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "I've been waiting for you to come to me," he said quietly. "I could see the weight you've been carrying." Sarah's throat constricted. "I don't know what you mean." "The phone calls that make you go pale, the way you check over your shoulder when you think no one's looking, the fear in your eyes when someone mentions your late husband." He leaned forward slightly. "Sister Sarah, this community has become your sanctuary, but sanctuaries only work when we're honest within their walls." Her hands trembled as she set the envelope on the desk. The photographs Marcus had shown her were inside, along with the documents that proved what she'd been running from all these months. Bank records, police reports, witness statements, all the evidence that painted her as an accomplice to theft that had cost 3 families their life savings. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered. Bishop Matthews opened the envelope and studied the contents without expression. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence as he examined each photograph, each document. Sarah watched his face for any sign of disgust or disappointment, but found only thoughtful concentration. Finally, he looked up. "Tell me about David." The name hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't spoken it aloud since arriving in Cedar Valley. "My husband. He was charming, brilliant with numbers. I thought he worked in investments, helping people grow their retirement funds." Her voice cracked. "I had no idea he was stealing from them until the FBI showed up at our door. But you ran." David was already dead by then. Heart attack 3 days after the investigation started. "I found out I was pregnant the same day I found out about the money." She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "I panicked. I knew how it would look. The grieving widow who just happened to disappear with the missing funds. Did you take the money, Sarah?" The question hung in the air between them. Outside she could hear the sounds of the church's evening activities, children playing in the gym, the women's choir practicing hymns, the gentle hum of community life that had become her whole world. "Yes," she breathed, "but not how they think. David had hidden accounts I didn't know about. After he died, I found the statements. The money was just sitting there while families were losing their homes. I tried to return it anonymously, but the FBI froze the accounts before I could transfer everything back." Bishop Matthews nodded slowly. "How much is still missing?" $200,000. "It's in a safety deposit box in Salt Lake City. I kept telling myself I'd find a way to return it, but then Marcus found me and everything became about survival." Marcus Reeves. The bishop's voice carried a note she'd never heard before, something cold and calculating. "He's been asking questions around town. About you, about the pregnancy, about how long you've been here." Sarah's blood chilled. "What kind of questions?" "The kind a private investigator asks when he's building a case." Bishop Matthews stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the evening sky. "Or when he's planning something that requires leverage. I should leave tonight. I won't let him hurt this community because of me." "Where would you go, Sister Sarah? How far do you think you'd get in your condition, with a man like Reeves hunting you?" The hopelessness of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was 8 months pregnant, alone, with nowhere to run and no one to trust except the man standing before her, a man she'd just confessed her crimes to. "There's something else you should know," Bishop Matthews said, still looking out the window. "Marcus Reeves isn't just any private investigator. He works exclusively for the Steinberg Group." Sarah's heart stopped. The Steinberg Group, David's former employer, the company that had discovered his embezzlement. They'd been the ones pushing hardest for prosecution, demanding not just the return of the stolen money, but criminal charges for everyone involved. They don't just want the money back, she realized. They want to make an example of me. Yes, and they're willing to destroy anyone who gets in their way. He turned back to her, and his expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen it. "Including this community, if they think we've been harboring a fugitive." The baby kicked hard as if sensing her distress. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Protect her child by running, or protect the people who'd saved her by staying and facing whatever Marcus had planned. "What do I do?" she whispered. Bishop Matthews returned to his desk and gathered the photographs back into the envelope. "We fight," he said simply. "But first, we need to know exactly what we're fighting against." The kitchen light cast harsh shadows across David's face as he sat across from Sarah, his hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. The silence between them had stretched for nearly an hour, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling around them. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About Marcus, about everything that happened before." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had been restless all evening, as if sensing the tension that filled the room. She'd told David the partial truth, about Marcus's death, about running, about needing to disappear, but she hadn't told him about the USB drive hidden beneath the loose floorboard upstairs, or about the federal agents who'd been asking questions around town. "David, I never wanted any of this to touch your family, your community." He looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench. Not anger, but a deep, weary sadness. "It's not just about us anymore, is it? There are other people involved, people who might get hurt." Before Sarah could respond, headlights swept across the kitchen window. David moved to peer through the curtains, his body going rigid. "There's a car in the driveway, black sedan." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She recognized the description. The same car that had been parked outside the grocery store 3 days ago, the one she'd convinced herself was nothing more than paranoia made manifest. "Back door," she whispered, already moving. "We need to—" The sharp rap of knuckles against the front door cut her off. 3 measured knocks, then silence. David caught her arm gently but firmly. "Sarah, whatever this is, running won't solve it, not anymore." His eyes dropped to her rounded belly. "And you can't keep running forever." Another series of knocks, more insistent this time. "Mr. Kimball?" A woman's voice, professional and patient. "We're with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you about Sarah Morrison." Sarah felt the room spin around her. They weren't just asking questions anymore. They knew exactly where she was, which meant Marcus's associates had finally caught up with her, or worse, the federal investigation had progressed, far enough that her location was no longer a secret. David's grip on her arm tightened slightly. "What did Marcus do, Sarah? What exactly are you running from?" The weight of everything she'd kept hidden pressed down on her like a physical force. The money laundering operation Marcus had been part of, the evidence he'd tried to use as insurance against his partners, the federal investigation that had been building for years, all of it had followed her here, to this quiet house where David's family had shown her nothing but kindness. "He stole money," she said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush, "from very dangerous people. And when they found out, when they came for him—" She swallowed hard. "I was there. I saw what they did." The knocking had stopped, but Sarah could hear voices outside, low and urgent, more than one person. Her mind raced through possibilities. FBI agents wouldn't typically conduct interviews at this hour unless something had forced their hand. David stood slowly, his face pale but resolute. "What did you see?" "Everything," Sarah whispered. "I have evidence. Names, dates, financial records. Marcus gave it to me before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, and she gasped, one hand flying to her side. The stress was affecting everything now, her body, her mind, her ability to think clearly about what came next. "Sarah," David's voice was gentle but urgent, "those people outside, they might be the only thing standing between you and whoever killed Marcus. But they're also probably the only people who can protect this community from whatever storm is coming." She looked at him through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "If I cooperate with them, if I turn over what I have, there's no going back. The people Marcus was involved with, they'll know I'm the one who brought them down. And if you don't?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. They both knew the answer. The dangerous men who'd killed Marcus wouldn't stop looking for her, or for the evidence she carried. Eventually, they would find this house, this family, this community that had become her sanctuary. A new sound reached them from outside. Car doors slamming, engines starting, but not departing. More arrivals. David moved back to the window, and Sarah saw his face go white. There are more cars coming. 3, maybe 4. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. FBI agents didn't typically travel in convoys unless they expected trouble, which meant the other side had found her too. "David," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Get your family out of here, now." He turned back to her, and she saw the moment he understood that their quiet refuge was about to become a battleground. The basement of the old meeting house smelled of dust and forgotten hymnal pages. Sarah pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly as footsteps echoed overhead. She'd slipped away from the evening service when Brother Matthews began his sermon about redemption, the irony too sharp to bear. Her phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "Time's running out, Sarah. Tell them the truth or I will—" Marcus Chen's investigation had been closing in for weeks, but now someone else knew her secret. Someone who understood exactly what leverage they held over her and the entire Millfield community. The basement door creaked open above her. Light spilled down the wooden steps, followed by the soft shuffle of familiar footsteps. Sister Rebecca appeared, her weathered face creased with concern. "Child, what are you doing down here? The whole congregation is worried." Sarah quickly deleted the message, her hands trembling. "Just needed some air. The baby's been restless." Rebecca descended the stairs slowly, her arthritis evident in each careful step. At 73, she was the unofficial mother of their small Mormon community, the one who'd taken Sarah in when she'd arrived broken and desperate 18 months ago. "You've been distant lately," Rebecca said, settling beside her on an old wooden crate. "Ever since that detective started sniffing around." The words hung heavy between them. Sarah had never told anyone about her life before Millfield, not about David's gambling debts, not about the men who'd killed him, not about what she'd done to survive. The community had asked no questions when she'd arrived with nothing but a beat-up Honda and a story about being widowed. They'd simply opened their arms and their hearts. "Rebecca, what would you do if someone you loved had done something terrible, something that could hurt everyone you care about?" The older woman's eyes studied Sarah's face in the dim light filtering from upstairs. "I'd remember that we're all sinners in need of grace. That's why we have each other." A single tear escaped down Sarah's cheek. What if the sin was so big that grace couldn't cover it? "There's no sin too big for God's grace, child. But sometimes the hardest part is forgiving ourselves." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Chen, found something interesting in David's old files. "We should talk." Her blood ran cold. David's files had been destroyed in the fire that consumed their Vegas apartment, or so she'd thought. What could Chen have possibly found? "Sarah?" Rebecca's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're white as a sheet." The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Sarah doubled over slightly, gasping. Everything was closing in too fast. The anonymous threats, Chen's investigation, the weight of 18 months of lies pressing down on her chest. "I have to go," she whispered, struggling to her feet. "Now? In your condition? It's nearly dark." But Sarah was already climbing the stairs, her mind racing. She needed to get to Chen before he dug any deeper. Maybe she could convince him that whatever he'd found was meaningless, that David was just a gambling addict who'd gotten in over his head. The evening air hit her like a slap as she pushed through the meeting house doors. The parking lot was nearly empty. Most of the congregation was still inside, listening to Brother Matthews's sermon about the price of redemption. If only he knew how prophetic his words were. Her Honda sat alone under a flickering streetlight. Sarah fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. As she bent to retrieve them, a shadow moved behind her. "Going somewhere?" She spun around to find Marcus Chen leaning against a black sedan, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Detective, I was just running. Again." He pushed off from the car and walked toward her slowly. "That seems to be your go-to move when things get complicated." "I don't know what you mean." "David's safety deposit box, Sarah. The one you cleaned out 3 days before his murder." Chen pulled a manila folder from his jacket. "Bank records don't lie, neither do security cameras." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. The safety deposit box, she'd forgotten about the cameras. In her panic after David's death, she'd only thought about getting the evidence before the wrong people found it. What was in the box, Sarah? What was worth risking your life for? The baby moved restlessly, and Sarah felt a sharp pain shoot through her side. Stress was bad for the pregnancy. Dr. Morrison had warned her repeatedly. But how could she stay calm when her entire world was crumbling? Behind them, the meeting house doors opened and voices spilled into the night. Service was ending. In minutes, the parking lot would be full of good people who'd trusted her, who'd welcomed her into their community without question. People who deserved better than her lies. "Get in the car," Chen said quietly. "We need to talk." The hospital room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she stared at the ultrasound monitor. The technician had left her alone with the grainy black and white image frozen on the screen, her daughter's profile, perfect and innocent, unaware of the chaos surrounding her existence. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Martinez entered, his expression carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the tension in his shoulders. "The tests came back clean," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "No signs of preeclampsia or other complications. Physically, you and the baby are fine." Sarah's relief lasted only seconds before his next words. "However, I'm concerned about your stress levels. Your blood pressure is elevated, and given what you've told me about your situation—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think it would be best if you stayed here tonight. For observation." "I can't." Sarah struggled to sit up straighter. "Bishop Thornton will be expecting me to return. If I don't show up—" "Sarah." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've lived in this community for 15 years. I know how things work here, but my oath is to you and your child, not to anyone else. If you need protection, there are people who can help." The offer hung between them like a lifeline Sarah wasn't sure she deserved to grab. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The sender's name made her blood run cold. Marcus Chen. "Found something interesting in Dad's old files. We need to talk, tonight." Her hands trembled as she set the phone aside. Marcus was supposed to be in Seattle, finishing his residency. If he was back in Millfield asking questions about his father's death. "I have to go," she whispered. Dr. Martinez studied her face. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." Sarah swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the wave of dizziness that followed. "Doctor, what do you know about Deputy Chen's death?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Tom? It was a car accident. Tragic, really. He was a good man, asked the right questions when others preferred silence." He paused. "Why do you ask?" Sarah's mind raced. If Dr. Martinez knew Tom had been investigating something, perhaps he knew more than he was letting on. But could she trust him? In Millfield, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "His son is back in town," she said carefully. "I think he might be looking into his father's case." "Marcus." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. "Bright kid. Stubborn, like his father." His eyes met Sarah's. "Tom came to see me a few weeks before he died. Asked about medical records, specifically about treatments for trauma, physical and psychological. He seemed to think someone in town was covering up abuse." The room felt like it was tilting. Sarah gripped the bed rail to steady herself. "Did he say who?" "No, but he was particularly interested in the timeline around when you first arrived in Millfield." "Sarah, if you know something about Tom's death, about what he was investigating—" The door burst open, cutting him off. Bishop Thornton stood in the doorway, his usually serene expression replaced by something harder, more calculating. Behind him lurked Brother Matthews, whose presence sent ice through Sarah's veins. "Sister Hammond," Bishop Thornton's voice carried the weight of authority. "We've been worried about you. When you didn't return for evening prayer." "I was keeping her for observation," Dr. Martinez interjected, rising from his chair. "Standard procedure given her condition." "How thoughtful." The bishop's smile never reached his eyes. "But I'm sure Sister Hammond would prefer to recover in the comfort of her own home, surrounded by her spiritual family. Wouldn't you, Sarah?" It wasn't really a question. Sarah could feel the trap closing around her, but with her phone containing Marcus's message burning in her pocket, she knew she had no choice but to play along. "Of course," she managed. "I'm feeling much better now." Dr. Martinez shot her a warning look, but she was already gathering her things. As they prepared to leave, he caught her arm. "My number's in your phone," he whispered urgently. "Use it if you need to, day or night." The ride back to the compound passed in tense silence. Sarah sat between Bishop Thornton and Brother Matthews, hyper-aware of their proximity, of the way Matthew's eyes kept drifting to her in the rearview mirror. Her daughter kicked restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger. As they pulled through the compound gates, Sarah spotted an unfamiliar car parked near the main building, a silver sedan with Seattle plates. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Marcus was here, somewhere in the compound, asking questions that could unravel everything, and she was walking directly into the center of a web that had already claimed his father's life. The car stopped, and Bishop Thornton's hand settled on her shoulder with deceptive gentleness. "Welcome home, Sister Hammond. I think it's time we had a long overdue conversation about your past." The morning sun cast long shadows across the chapel floor as Sarah knelt in the empty pews, her hands pressed against her swollen belly. The baby had been restless all night, as if sensing the turmoil that churned within her. She'd come here seeking peace, but the silence only amplified the war raging in her mind. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she turned to find Bishop Matthews approaching, his weathered face etched with concern. He'd aged years in the past few days, the weight of recent revelations pressing down on his shoulders like a yoke. "Sister Morrison," he said softly, settling into the pew beside her. "I thought I might find you here." Sarah straightened, wiping at her eyes. "I needed to think, to pray, about Detective Harrison's visit yesterday." The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Harrison had been relentless, pressing for details about Marcus Webb's final days, about the missing research data, about the connections between Webb's pharmaceutical work and the recent deaths in their community. Sarah had deflected as best she could, but she could see the suspicion growing in the detective's eyes. "He knows more than he's letting on," Sarah whispered. "About Marcus, about what really happened." Bishop Matthews nodded grimly. "Brother Hendricks came to see me last night. He's frightened, Sarah. We all are." Sarah's blood ran cold. James Hendricks had been Marcus's closest confidant, the only other person who knew the full extent of the human trials they'd conducted. If he was talking to the bishop, it meant their carefully constructed walls were crumbling. "What did he tell you?" The bishop's hands trembled as he clasped them together. "Enough to know that we're all in grave danger. The medication Marcus developed, the one that was supposed to help our community with chronic pain, it wasn't properly tested, was it?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 18 months of lies pressing down on her. When Marcus had first approached the church leadership about conducting trials of his experimental pain medication, he'd painted it as a miracle cure, a way to help their aging congregation, many of whom suffered from arthritis and other chronic conditions. What he hadn't told them was that the compound was still in early development, that the side effects were largely unknown. "Marcus thought he could help people," she said finally. "The initial results were promising. But then people started dying." The bishop's voice was hollow. Sister Chen first, then Brother Rodriguez, now Elder Thompson. All of them were part of the trial. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The deaths had been spread out over months, attributed to natural causes or underlying health conditions, but Marcus had known the truth. The medication was causing fatal cardiac episodes in a small percentage of users. He'd tried to pull the plug on the trials, but by then it was too late. Too many people were involved. Too many had unknowingly participated. "Detective Harrison found medical records," the bishop continued, "traces of the compound in the victim's systems. It's only a matter of time before he connects all the dots." Sarah felt the baby kick sharply, and she gasped, placing both hands on her belly. The child inside her was innocent, untouched by the sins of its father. But if the truth came out, if Marcus's research was exposed, the scandal would destroy not just her, but everyone who had trusted them. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely audible. "The research data, it's not gone. Marcus hid backup files before he died. He was planning to turn himself in, to expose everything." Bishop Matthews stared at her in shock. "Where?" "Safety deposit box. Downtown First National. I have the key. The implications hung heavy between them. The data would prove Marcus's guilt, but it would also implicate the church leadership who had knowingly allowed the trials to continue even after the first death. Criminal charges, wrongful death lawsuits, the complete destruction of their community, it would all follow. We could destroy it, the bishop said quietly. The files, the evidence, let sleeping dogs lie. Sarah shook her head. More people could die. The compound is still out there, Bishop. Other pharmaceutical companies might try to develop it. The data contains warnings, protocols that could save lives, and damn us all in the process. Sarah stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. I have to think about my child's future. What kind of world am I bringing them into? One built on lies and covered-up deaths, or one where the truth, however painful, is allowed to shine? The bishop rose beside her, his face pale but resolute. Whatever you decide, Sister Morrison, you won't face it alone. This community may have failed in many ways, but we won't abandon you now. As Sarah walked toward the chapel doors, she felt the weight of the safety deposit box key in her pocket. In a few hours she would have to choose: protect the people who had become her family, or honor the memory of those whose deaths demanded justice. The baby kicked again, and Sarah whispered a prayer for forgiveness. Fluorescent lights of the police station hummed overhead as Sarah sat across from Detective Martinez, her hands folded protectively over her swollen belly. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the tension that had consumed her for weeks. Through the one-way glass, she could see Bishop Crawford pacing in the hallway, his usually composed demeanor cracked with worry. Mrs. Chen, we need you to start from the beginning, Martinez said, sliding a digital recorder across the metal table. Tell us about Marcus Webb. Sarah's breath caught at the name she'd tried so desperately to bury. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she pressed her palm against the movement. He's dead. Marcus has been dead for over a year. That's what we thought too, until his fingerprints showed up at 3 different crime scenes across Utah in the past month. Martinez leaned forward, her dark eyes intense, including the break-in at your neighbor's house last week. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. That's impossible. I saw him die. I watched the building collapse. Buildings can be deceiving, Mrs. Chen. Bodies aren't always found. Martinez opened a manila folder and spread several photographs across the table. Recognize any of these locations? Sarah's eyes moved across the images: a ransacked apartment in Salt Lake City, a storage unit with its lock cut off, and most chilling of all, the exterior of the Relief Society building where she'd been teaching the children's Sunday school class. Her hands began to shake. What does he want? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Sarah knew the answer, had known it since the first threatening note appeared under her windshield wiper 2 weeks ago. Marcus wanted what he'd always wanted: control, revenge, and the leverage that came with the secret she'd carried across 3 states to find sanctuary in this quiet Mormon community. There's something you need to understand about Marcus, Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't just my husband's business partner. He was the one who convinced David to start laundering money through the construction company. When David tried to get out, when he found out about the baby and wanted to go clean, she swallowed hard. Marcus killed him. Martinez's pen stilled on her notepad. You witnessed your husband's murder? I saw Marcus push David off that scaffolding, made it look like an accident. But I had David's phone with me that day. He'd forgotten it at home. Marcus didn't know about the voice messages David had been recording, documenting everything he'd learned about Marcus's operation. Where are those recordings now? Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her purse, where a small digital drive had been hidden in a secret compartment for 14 months. Safe, for now. The door opened, and Bishop Crawford stepped inside, his face grave. Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to know. Sister Williams just called. Someone broke into the Relief Society building again. They went through all the records, specifically the ones about the families who've helped you. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Marcus wasn't just hunting her. He was targeting everyone who'd shown her kindness. The Hendersons who'd given her furniture for her apartment. The Petersons who'd driven her to doctor appointments. Sister Martinez who'd organized the baby shower. All of them were now in danger because of the secret she'd brought into their lives. "He's escalating," Detective Martinez observed, closing her folder. "Mrs. Chen, those recordings might be the only way to stop him permanently. But if we're going to build a case, we need them now." Sarah looked between the detective and Bishop Crawford, seeing in their faces the same protective determination that had characterized this community's embrace of her from the very beginning. These people had saved her when she had nowhere else to turn, had given her hope for a future where her child could grow up safe and loved. But now that future hung in the balance. "If I give you the recordings," Sarah said slowly, "Marcus will know. He'll come for me directly." "Then we'll be ready for him," Bishop Crawford said firmly. "This community doesn't abandon its own, Sarah. We've faced challenges before." Detective Martinez nodded. "We can provide protection, set up a safe house, but we need to move fast. Every day we wait gives him more time to hurt innocent people." Sarah felt another strong kick from the baby, and this time it didn't feel like distress. It felt like a reminder that she was no longer just protecting herself. She was protecting the child who would inherit whatever world she chose to create with her decisions today. Standing slowly, her hands still pressed against her belly, Sarah made the choice that would determine all their fates. "The recordings are in my apartment. But Detective Martinez, when we get Marcus, I want to be there. I want him to see my face when he finally pays for what he did to David." The basement of the old church felt like a tomb, its stone walls pressing in around Sarah as she descended the narrow stairs. Bishop Morrison's flashlight cut through the darkness ahead of her, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the ancient stonework. Her hand trembled against the cold metal railing, each step sending a sharp pain through her swollen belly. "Almost there," Morrison whispered, though his voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "Brother Henley is waiting." Sarah's mind raced. Thomas Henley had been absent from church services for weeks, and now she understood why. The community's most trusted elder, the man who had first welcomed her into their fold, was hiding in the bowels of the very building where she'd found salvation. The beam of light revealed a heavy wooden door, its surface scarred with age. Morrison knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door creaked open to reveal Henley's gaunt face, his usually pristine appearance disheveled. His eyes, once warm and paternal, now held the wild desperation of a cornered animal. "Sarah," he breathed, stepping aside to let them enter. "I prayed you wouldn't come to this." The room beyond was sparse. A cot, a small table, and boxes of what appeared to be church records stacked against the far wall. But it was the laptop computer glowing on the makeshift desk that made Sarah's blood run cold. She recognized the encrypted messaging system on the screen, the same one Marcus had used in his final weeks. "You know why we're here," Morrison said, his pastoral demeanor completely gone. "She's figured it out." Henley's shoulders sagged. "I never wanted any of this. When Marcus first approached me, I thought he was just another lost soul seeking redemption." "But you knew what he was running from," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You knew about Detroit." The old man nodded slowly. "He told me everything, the trafficking ring, the children, the money. Said he wanted to make amends, to use his technical skills to help expose the network from the inside." Henley's voice cracked. "I thought we could use the information to save those children. I thought God had sent him to us for a purpose." Sarah felt the baby kick hard against her ribs as if sensing her distress. But something went wrong. "Marcus got greedy," Morrison interjected. "He was supposed to gather evidence, but instead he started skimming money. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. He claimed it was for the baby, for your future together." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd known Marcus was hiding something, but she'd never imagined he continued his criminal activities after joining their community. That's why they found him. He compromised everything, Henley said, gesturing helplessly at the computer. The encryption, the safe houses, the identities of federal agents working the case. When his former associates realized what he'd done, they came looking. And you helped them find him, Sarah said, the pieces finally clicking into place. You gave them Marcus to protect the community. Morrison stepped closer, his presence suddenly menacing in the confined space. We had no choice. If the authorities had discovered our involvement, it would have destroyed everything we've built here. Hundreds of faithful families would have been scattered. So you murdered him. The words came out as barely a whisper, but they echoed in the stone chamber like a shout. We tried to convince him to disappear, Henley said, to take you and leave quietly. But he refused, said he was done running, that he wanted to raise his child in a place where truth mattered. The old man laughed bitterly. Truth, as if truth was more important than the greater good. Sarah's legs felt weak. She groped for the edge of the cot and lowered herself onto it, one hand protectively covering her belly. How many others know? Just us, Morrison said. And now you. The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah looked between the two men who had once represented safety and spiritual guidance in her life. Now they stood before her as conspirators and killers, their faces hard with resolve. What happens now? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Henley opened a desk drawer and withdrew a small vial of clear liquid. You're 8 months pregnant. The stress of recent events has triggered early labor complications. You'll be found in your apartment tomorrow morning, the victim of a tragic medical emergency. The baby? Sarah's voice was barely audible. Will be raised by a loving family in the community, Morrison said. Your child will grow up surrounded by faith and purpose, never knowing the darkness that brought them into this world. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of the evening service beginning upstairs, voices raised in hymns of praise and devotion, the same voices that had welcomed her, comforted her, and now conspired to silence her forever. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if fighting for the life they would never have together. The basement of the old meeting house held secrets older than Ruth's arrival in Millfield. As she descended the wooden steps, each creak seemed to echo through decades of whispered confessions and hidden truths. Bishop Morrison's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of leather-bound journals and metal filing cabinets that looked untouched for years. Your husband wasn't the first person to seek sanctuary here, Morrison said, his voice heavy with resignation. This community has always been a haven for those running from their past. Sometimes we've been too willing to look the other way. Ruth's hand instinctively moved to her belly as another contraction rippled through her. The baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. But first, she needed to understand the full scope of what David had brought to their doorstep. Morrison pulled out a thick manila envelope from one of the cabinets. David came to me 3 months after you married him. He was terrified, said people from his old life were closing in. He wanted to confess everything, to clear his conscience before the baby came. What did he tell you? Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. That the pharmaceutical company wasn't just his employer, he was their primary money launderer. Millions of dollars in drug profits funneled through fake clinical trials and research grants. When he tried to get out, they made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. The pieces clicked together in Ruth's mind with sickening clarity. The frequent business trips, the encrypted phone calls, the way David would sometimes stare at her with such desperate love, as if memorizing her face. He'd been preparing for this moment long before she realized the danger they were in. There's more, Morrison continued, pulling out a small digital recorder. He recorded everything, names, account numbers, locations of their operations. He said if anything happened to him, this information needed to reach the right people. A sharp pain doubled Ruth over, stronger than the previous contractions. When she straightened, She could see Morrison's conflicted expression in the flashlight's glow. "You knew they would come for it," she said, understanding flooding through her. "That's why you've been so protective, why you moved me into the Hansons' house where everyone could watch over me. You weren't just helping a widow, you were guarding evidence." "I thought we had more time." David said they didn't know about Millfield, didn't know he'd gotten married. But someone talked, or they followed a trail we missed. Above them, footsteps echoed through the meeting house floor. Morrison clicked off the flashlight, plunging them into complete darkness. Ruth held her breath, listening to the measured pace of someone searching the building systematically. "There's another way out," Morrison whispered, taking her elbow to guide her deeper into the basement. "Tunnel system from the Underground Railroad days. It connects to the Hanson farm." They moved carefully through the blackness, Morrison's hand trailing along the wall until he found what he was looking for, a section that swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. The air was musty and thick, but Ruth could feel a faint breeze, suggesting the tunnel was still intact. Another contraction hit just as they entered the passage, this one strong enough to make her gasp. Morrison steadied her, his face grim in the dim light filtering from his phone. "How far apart are they now?" "Maybe 10 minutes, Ruth panted. "Morrison, I can't have this baby in a tunnel. And I can't keep running. My child deserves better than a life spent looking over our shoulders." "What are you saying?" Ruth straightened, her resolve crystallizing despite the pain. "I'm saying it ends here. David died protecting that evidence, and I'm not going to let his sacrifice be meaningless. We use what he gathered to destroy their operation, but we do it right. We involve the FBI, the DEA, whoever can make sure these people can never hurt another family." Morrison studied her face in the pale light. "That means testifying, going into witness protection possibly. It means giving up the life you've built here." "I know." Ruth's voice broke slightly. "This community saved me, gave me a home when I had nothing, but I can't stay if it means putting everyone in danger. The Hansons, the Weatherbys, even you. You've all become targets because of me." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the tunnel. Someone had found the basement entrance. Morrison grabbed the recorder and David's files, shoving them into a waterproof bag. "There's a phone in the tunnel junction ahead. Direct line to Sheriff Coleman. You call him, tell him to contact Agent Sarah Chen at the Salt Lake City FBI office." David already made contact with her months ago. Another contraction seized Ruth, stronger and longer than before. When it passed, she could hear voices in the basement behind them, getting closer. "Go," Morrison urged. "I'll buy you time." "Bishop." "Go, Ruth. Protect that child. Do what David couldn't. Finish this." The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Sarah's feet as she emerged into the morning light, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. The media frenzy that had consumed Pleasant Valley for weeks had finally quieted, replaced by an eerie calm that seemed to settle over everything like dust after a storm. Detective Morrison waited by his unmarked car, his expression unreadable. "It's over," he said simply as she approached. "Marcus Chen confessed to everything this morning, the money laundering, the murders, even ordering the hit on your husband when David tried to pull out of their operation." Sarah nodded, feeling strangely hollow despite the relief that should have flooded through her. "And the community? Bishop Reynolds has been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. The church's involvement was limited to unwittingly providing cover through their charitable activities." Morrison's voice softened. They had no idea their refugee resettlement program was being used to move money. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very people she'd feared would reject her had been innocent victims themselves, manipulated by the same criminal network that had destroyed her previous life. She thought of Elena, of the other families who'd found sanctuary in Pleasant Valley only to discover their fresh start had been built on a foundation of lies. Sarah Bishop Reynolds' voice came from behind her. She turned to find him descending the courthouse steps, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes kind. "I wanted to speak with you before you left." Morrison excused himself with a nod, leaving them alone on the sidewalk. The bishop's hands were clasped behind his back, his familiar posture somehow comforting despite everything that had transpired. "I owe you an apology," he began. "We brought you into our community under false pretenses, even if we didn't realize it at the time. Our charity work, our efforts to help people like you start over, it was all being exploited by criminals." Sarah shook her head. "You saved my life, Bishop. Maybe not in the way you intended, but you did. When I came here, I was running from David's associates. I thought they'd killed him because he'd stolen from them. I never imagined he was trying to get us both out of Chen's operation." The revelation had come during Chen's interrogation. David hadn't been the criminal Sarah had believed him to be for so long. He'd gotten involved with Chen's money laundering scheme during a desperate financial period, but when he learned about the violence, the murders, he'd tried to extract himself and his pregnant wife. It had cost him his life. "Your husband was trying to protect you," Bishop Reynolds said gently. "And in a way he succeeded. By creating that false identity for you, by getting you to Pleasant Valley, he ensured you'd be safe when his past finally caught up with him." Sarah's hand moved to the simple wedding ring she still wore. She'd spent so long hating David's memory, believing he'd been nothing more than a criminal who'd endangered their unborn child. The truth was more complicated, more human. He'd made terrible choices, but in the end, he'd tried to make them right. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's up to you. You're welcome to stay in Pleasant Valley for as long as you'd like. The community has voted unanimously to support you and the baby, regardless of what brought you to us initially." The offer touched her more deeply than she'd expected. These people had learned that their charity had been manipulated, that they'd unknowingly harbored someone connected to serious crimes, yet they were still extending their hands in welcome. "I think I need some time to figure out who I really am," Sarah admitted. "For so long I've been either David's wife or Anna Martinez. I'm not sure I know how to be just myself." Bishop Reynolds smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "The beauty of fresh starts, Sarah, is that they can happen more than once. We'll be here when you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or 10 years from now." As he walked away, Sarah remained on the courthouse steps, watching the life of the small town continue around her. Elena emerged from the building with her own family, catching Sarah's eye and offering a small wave. They'd testified together, two women whose lives had been upended by the same criminal conspiracy, finding strength in their shared truth. The baby kicked, a strong flutter that reminded Sarah she wasn't making these decisions alone. Soon, she'd be someone's mother, responsible for shaping a young life free from the shadows that had defined her own recent years. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number Detective Morrison had given her for victim services. It was time to reclaim her real name, her real identity, and build something genuine from the ashes of all the lies. For the first time in months, Sarah felt truly free to choose her own path forward.